So now when we come back to our initial very simple calculation, a lot of this stuff should be more familiar to you now. So we declare the variables, we execute the calculation, and then we format our result very nicely in a nice output statement using f strings. And here we're dealing with different data, with strings, with integers, and with floats. So you see, even a simple program like that, there's a lot of conceptual stuff that you have to go through, but I hope that this was clear enough. So let's go to the next step, make this whole thing a little bit more useful, because where programming really becomes useful is not to do a simple calculation that you can do that on the calculator. You don't need Python for that. But if you have 1,000 samples or 100,000 samples, then programming becomes very, very useful. It becomes your best friend, and it saves you a lot of time, because what 100,000 calculation would take you a very long time, and Python can do that in milliseconds. So that's where program becomes powerful. And the first steps for this, the most important concepts to learn to really automate things, are using container types, and the most important one here is a list, and using for loops. So this is very much a core function in automation of things using code. So we do this here in this example here. Instead of one value now, we have several different values, and we could have 100,000 values here as well. And we perform the same calculation, but we perform it over and over again. So in this statement here, we come back to for loops in a bit, but we say for molecular weight in mole weights in this list, and then it takes the first value, does the calculation, prints it out, then it comes back, takes the second value, and so on. And in this way, very quickly, you get all your calculations done and printed out. And if you want to do this in a really sort of proper program, you would probably read in a file to bring in these values into the list, and then you output another file to store the values in your computer, for example. But in this simple way, we just use the terminal for the output. So let's go through this. So there's two more concepts here to learn, the lists and the for loops. So let's start with lists. What are lists? They are, yeah, as the name is here, the containers. So you define them with these square brackets, and then anything in the square brackets is separated by a comma. These are the individual values that are stored in the list. And you can store anything in the list. You can even store lists in lists or things like that. Any Python object can be stored, and it can be different data types. So you can have in the same list, you can have a number, a string, and a boolean, for example. There are a few tricks to access individual values. So indices is something that is hard-coded into lists, so you can access values via indices. In Python, we start things with 0. So the first value can be accessed with sample 0, second value sample 1. This can become a little bit confusing, but you get used to it quickly. And you can immediately access the length of the list using the length method, which when you say length and then in the brackets you put the name of the list, it gives you the length. These are very basic features of lists in Python. So to create lists, you just define a variable with the name of the list, so the concentrations equals, and then square bracket and your values separated by commas. And then here this is a practice for what I just told you, indexing and length. So this allows you to access different values. If you change this to 1, we get the second, we get 3.8 here, and so on. You can do several interesting things with lists, and this happens a lot when you write programs where you, for example, so here you print out the whole list initially, and then let's say we want to add something to the list. We use the append keyword, so the list genes, we want to append EGFR, so EGFR will come back at the bottom, so this at the end of the list. This happens here. We can replace values, so we can say instead of the first, the second entry is TP53, so genes index 1, we want to exchange this with kras, so we just declare that particular variable here as kras, and lo and behold, now we have kras here. We can remove individual entries in the list, and we can also do a check. This will give us a boolean. We'll say either true or false. We can say is BRCA1 in the list, so we don't use is here. This is a very simple Python way of asking a question. Say BRCA1 in genes, and if it is in the list, it will give you true. Let's say here ATR is not in the list, and this will be false now. So this can be very useful for logic operations, which we'll cover later on. Again, I'm going through this very quickly and cover quite a lot of ground here, but the ball is really with you. You need to practice this stuff. So write these things out. There's a simple practice here and more practice in the Colab notebooks.